But they're
Interesting fun parking.
so all of theirs.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Manchester, City of Village Charm. Senator Chris S. Murphy grew up 10 minutes from here in Wethersfield. He attended Williams College, where he graduated with honors in a double major in history and political science. After graduating from UConn Law, he worked as a lawyer in Hartford. This senator is married to Kathy Houlihan, a legal aid attorney who represents children in New Britain and Waterbury. Chris and Kathy have 2 sons, Owen and Ryder, and they reside in Cheshire. Senator Murphy's political career started in the Connecticut General Assembly, where he worked for 8 years. Then on to Connecticut's 5th Congressional District for 3 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. He worked his way up by putting in the time to understand and support policy for middle-class Americans, like us here in Manchester and our neighbors. He's not a one-timer who wants to buy a seat because he has the money. Chris has made the commitment. He has the knowledge and intellect to understand our complicated government. No one gave him anything. He earned it the old-fashioned way, the same way that we teach our children. You work hard and you'll succeed. That's the American way, and that's what separates our country from others. We want the best and the brightest in our government, not the privileged. I first crossed paths with Chris when he worked in the General Assembly. And this young congressman was a superstar right off. He's a natural-born leader, and Connecticut residents have and will continue to be well-served with him at the helm. When I was elected mayor at the swearing-in ceremony, I had the opportunity to select the master's ceremonies, and I called Chris, and he graciously came to Manchester. For such a young man, he's already achieved a lifetime of success. But for Chris Murphy, he's just getting warmed up. Connecticut is fortunate to have a senator of his caliber. Manchester is privileged to host this town hall meeting. I'd like to welcome everyone to MCC on Main. And please join me in welcoming Senator Christopher Murphy.
Well, thank you very much, Leo, and thank you to everybody for coming out on a rainy Sunday afternoon. This is fantastic to see such a great turnout. And I'm really excited to be here. As Leo said, I was lucky enough to be there for his swearing-in ceremony, and I've got a lot of friends here from local government who have joined us here today. But this was actually the first town that I came to after I announced that I was going to run for the United States Senate. I gave my first speech ever as a candidate for the Senate here in Manchester, and so in a lot of ways it's wonderful to be back where at least the last 2 years of my life started in a lot of ways. Let me just sort of let you know how this is going to work, because we've got a full house here. I'm going to make a few opening remarks. I'm going to try to touch on sort of the hottest subjects, really just 3 of the hottest subjects that are going on in Washington right now. Try to do that pretty briefly, and then we're going to open it up to questions. What we've done to try to make this as sort of orderly as possible is ask people who want to ask questions to write them down on note cards. Those are still available, I assume, in the back of the room. Hands raised, Megan and Lee, who have those cards. So anybody that wants to ask a question, just write it down on a card, submit it to them. Sean is going to read them off. We are going to take as many as we can. We're not sorting through to take just the easy ones. We're going to take the tough ones and the easy ones. We've actually got some questions that were submitted via Twitter as well that we asked people to submit if they couldn't be here. So we're going to be popping some of those up on the screen, sort of scattering those throughout the questions that you submitted. And then we'll go for as long as we can go for here and try to cover as many topics as we can. And here's how I like to do this. This is the first time that I've been here speaking in Manchester, and for a lot of you, this is the first time that I've had the honor to represent you. I represented the northwestern part of the state in the Congress for about 6 years, but even though, as Leo mentioned, I grew up not far from here in Wethersfield, this is the first time that I've represented central Connecticut. And I hope what you'll find over the next hour and a half is that I'm going to tell it like it is. I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm going to tell you where I think Washington has gone wrong, where things can be better. I hope this won't sound too political to you, because it's time in this country for some honest talk about the place that we are and how we move forward. I'm a father of two little boys, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I'm doing this job because I want to leave a better place for them, because I think things are pretty screwed up in this country. Priorities have been pretty screwed up in Washington for a long time, and I want to fix that, but I want to do it together. I'm a representative of this state, and that means that I got to listen to all of you. Yeah, there are times in which, when I go down and cast a vote, I cast a vote that comes from my conscience, but those are rare moments. Most all of the time, I'm charged with just doing what you want me to do, and so the only way I can do that is by coming out here and listening and answering your questions. And so one of the things you're going to find from me as I sort of grow into this job of being a U.S. Senator is that we're going to do some formal events like this. I love these forums, town hall meetings, but I want to be even more proactive in how I listen to you. So you're going to also see notices for office hours that I'll hold at the local supermarket or shopping plaza. You might see this summer an advertisement for a hike that I'll lead through the woods, where you can come and just go hiking with your senator and have a really informal conversation along the way. You're going to see a lot of use of social media, so we'll do Twitter town halls and Facebook town halls. We're going to try to be as aggressive as we can in giving you as many avenues as possible to tell me what you think that I should be doing. That's the only way I know how to do this job. And you're going to find along the way that we're going to disagree. There's going to be places where you're going to feel like, okay, this guy's not where I want him to be on this issue, but you're also going to find places in which I'm willing to change my mind. I'm always willing to hear new information, and there have been times during my relatively brief time in politics where when I've heard from constituents who are smarter than me on an issue, that I've changed my position, and for some reason that's become a political weakness, flip-flopping, right? Well, listen, sometimes if you do it for the wrong reasons, it's a bad thing, but if you're doing it because you got better information, it's a good thing. And so I hope that even when you see me taking a position you disagree with, that you won't interact, because sometimes it'll make a difference. So let's get started with today's discussion. I'm going to touch on 3 subjects that are probably going to be taking up the lion's share of time in Congress for the next few weeks, and that is this sort of issue of sequestration, and I'll explain what that is for those that have the good sense to not know what it is. Then I will talk about immigration and gun control. Those, I think, are probably the topics that you'll hear the most about in the coming weeks. But I want you to talk about anything that you want to talk about. So I'm just going to put these out as food for thought, but if you have questions on anything, whether it's healthcare, education, or foreign aid, throw them at me, write down the question. We'll frankly try to take questions on as many different subjects as we can. So first, let's talk about the insanity of this thing called sequestration. Okay, I have no idea why somebody picked this word to describe what is essentially just a set of thoughtless automatic budget cuts that go into effect at the end of next week, across the board on every account except essentially for Medicare, which is spared most of the burden of these cuts. What happened was about a year ago, when we needed to raise our borrowing limit in order to spend the amount of money that was allocated in the budget, Republicans held up that normally administrative function of just raising the limit on the government's credit card, and when that happened, the way out was this agreement that we would set up a super committee to try to get a whole bunch of savings in the government accounts, and if the super committee didn't come up with an agreement, then these automatic spending cuts would go into effect. To be honest with you, I voted against that deal because I didn't believe that super committee was going to come up with a deal, and I thought it was kind of crazy to just put in a bunch of thoughtless automatic spending cuts instead of doing what Congress is supposed to do, which is decide which accounts should be cut and which accounts should be preserved. I mean, that's the whole reason you elect members of Congress, is to make decisions and create priorities. Well, there's nothing about these cuts that reflect priorities. The only priority was that we weren't going to cut Medicare as much as everything else, but basically everything else are getting pretty substantial cuts. And so if Congress doesn't, by the end of next week, make some changes, well, these are just some of the immediate numbers here in Connecticut, and it's really small writing, so you can't see it unless you're in the front row here. But so immediately what happens at the end of next week is 120 teachers get laid off, 500 Connecticut children just get cut off from access to their Head Start or school readiness programs. About 3,000 special education students stop receiving services across the state. We lose about $500,000 for our first responders. We lose $24 million in funding for medical research in the state, gone, just ripped out of the state's labs overnight. Down to healthcare, about 250 people who were scheduled to get free screenings for cancer don't get them, appointments canceled. 1,600 fewer children will get vaccinations, scheduled to get vaccinations this spring and this summer, they're not going to get them. And even though Medicare is spared most of the cuts, still there's going to be a 2% cut to all Medicare providers, which doesn't sound terrible, but when you have a lot of hospitals and nursing homes that are right now just hanging on by a thread, even that 2% cut on top of a lot of other cuts can hurt as well. Now, here's my perspective on this. I'm not standing here saying that some of these cuts, or at least some of these cuts in part, aren't necessary. Right? There's no way to fix the problem that we have in government today, where we're basically spending every year 50% more than we're taking in revenue without cutting government. Like, you absolutely have to cut government. The question is, how do you do it and where do you do it? Do you do it smartly, or do you do it just with a cleaver, which takes the same amount of money out of every single account? And the other question is, do you make sense of our budget only by cutting spending? Or do you ask the most affluent in this country, who have been doing very well, corporations, a lot of them who've been paying no taxes to the federal government over the last 5 to 10 years, to pay their fair share as well? And I think that 70% of the American public thinks that we should have a balanced approach. Says that yes, this is not sustainable, the fact that we're taking in a lot less money than we're sending out. And the way that you do that is by both cutting government spending and by asking some people to pay a little bit more. And that's frankly my approach on this. I'd like to see us say that people making over $1 million should be paying the same percentage of income taxes that a lot of people in here are paying, to ask them to pay a minimum of 30% of their income to the federal government. I'd like to see corporations who have basically gotten off paying no taxes legally to pay a minimum percentage into the federal government. But I'd also like to see some serious spending cuts. And when we do spending cuts, let's make some priorities. I would make the argument to you that there should be 3 accounts that should be basically set aside when we make spending cuts. Everything else is fair game, but I would say 3 accounts should be preserved, and that is education, infrastructure, and science. I think those are the 3 accounts that basically add to private sector job creation more than any other account. And that's what government funding has to be about. How does the government help the private sector create jobs? And when we're investing in great schools and colleges and like Manchester Community College, then we're helping provide both workers but also researchers and scientists to create jobs. And when we create good roads and bridges, we allow our businesses to get their goods and products to markets where they can sell them. And then when we invest in science, we know that we're investing in the best of America, which is our innovative capability. So those would be the 3 accounts that I think that we should preserve. But let's do it in a balanced way. I don't know what's going to happen at the end of this week. If I had to bet today, I'd say that this sequester is going into effect. And after this week, there are going to be some pretty massive cuts to government. You've heard from the president that one of the things, there's lots of things that happen. It may be that meat can't be inspect all meat being sold in this country can't be inspected anymore. There's some conversation from the Department of Transportation that the number of flights in this country is going to have to be dramatically cut because they're not going to have enough air traffic controllers. We'll see what the actual effect is at the end of this week, but I think the majority of people in this country want to get out of this through a balanced approach, both on the spending side and on the tax side, and I hope that we'll get there. I'm just going to